Hello everyone and welcome back to another album review, and in this video I'm going to review Mestarin Kynsi by Oranssi Pazuzu. It's been a while since I've done a metal review, and what an eclectic album to come back to. Oranssi Pazuzu, if I pronounce it correctly, is a Finnish black metal band that does not go into just the typical sound of black metal. It's one of those groups that has emerged towards the late 2000s, and since then they've done some very highly praised and very important albums that have a very interesting and tight combination of lots of different sounds throughout the realm of extreme music. You get a taste of like black metal, but mostly elements of like atmospheric black metal or avant-garde black metal, and another genre that is psychedelic rock, which for me this tag was slightly concerning. And given the fact that this was actually my introduction to Oranssi Pazuzu, it was always one of those bands I would say that I would get sometime, but there was always that psychedelic rock tag that would just make me avoid the band for such a long time. However, listening to this brand new project over here, I think that the combination of sounds they have is quite solid and it works really well for the most part. It's really interesting how out of all the genres when it comes to extreme metal music, when it comes to black metal, this is the genre that mostly expands into lots of different territories and has some pretty compelling results. And what I've experienced, especially with this brand new album from Oranssi Pazuzu, is something that I've rarely experienced before in the whole realm of extreme metal music. It is still one of those albums when it comes to black metal that is quite unique and very interesting. I wouldn't say that I've heard that many albums that would go into this direction, and yeah, there are some moments that are kind of your standard just portions of atmospheric black metal. There is a nice feel throughout this whole thing, which is how atmospheric it is. When it comes to some of the structures, it can be all over the place. Some very solid progressions that go into like progressive or avant-garde black metal, but truly the thing that makes it somewhat different and somewhat of a weird experience is the multiple electronics that are in this thing, which I don't know if it's that much of a thing with some of the previous releases from Oranssi Pazuzu, but this made for an album that was definitely interesting to say the least, because the multiple electronics throughout this whole album make for some very unique and very compelling results. And the album for me makes an amazing introduction, and I was instantly into this sound. The very first track, Ilmestys, is absolutely amazing. I love this track and I love the way it's structured. It goes into lots of different phases, and it's something that I've seen it's a case with pretty much every album from Oranssi Pazuzu, is that they have very lengthy tracks. They have a short track listing, but each track would go for about 7 to 10 minutes long. And I like how this track pretty much progresses with lots of different sounds, and it's definitely interesting, this combination of black metal and just this sort of psychedelic rock sound, which the main thing, especially in the first tracks, that give you the feel of a black metal album is actually the vocals, which are some very brutal and sort of demonic screams, something that you would say is sort of the thing you would just find in a Mayhem album with the vocals of Attila. This is pretty much the feel I get with some of the vocals from this album. They're definitely just really expressive in their own way, and the vocals are definitely not the easiest thing to sort of handle if you're not familiar with the sound of black metal, because when it comes to the instrumentation, most of the stuff over here are pretty much a bit more chill. They go into the slower pace, there are not that many sort of like blast beats. You still get some quite dirty guitars, but the overall sound and the production on this thing is very clear and it's very pristine. I like the sound on this album. When it comes to the electronics though, it's a very strange album because the electronics on this thing, first of all, they're all over the place in the entire album. And I think that the first track, Ilmestys, makes a very good work with the way it just places all of the multiple synths and sound throughout this thing. And it also feels like it sort of goes like borderline electro and techno music with some of the elements with its repetitive sounds, which is also something that is kind of the case with the second track, which is also a track that I really enjoyed out of this album. There was a moment though towards the 6-minute mark where we get a riff that for me it was slightly awkward and I didn't really feel it all that well, since it went into this very weird tone of like psychedelic rock with a sort of like country blues feel to it. Thankfully, the way it just progresses after this point with the synths makes for a very nice sort of progressive and avant-garde moment to the song, and it's also a moment where the progressions and the structure works in a fascinating way. So I definitely dig this track, but here comes the strange thing with this album where you get some electronics that feel so cheap with their sound. It's not like they sound bad in the mix or the way they're presented, it's just the sound themselves. They sound really sort of like weird and just so amateur, which is not like the atmospheric sort of black metal where you get some keyboard synths that are, you know, the very basic dungeon synth. We're talking about some sounds that go into some very weird, just like psychedelic 70s prog sounds. This album kinda sounds like a more atmospheric, slower and less technical version of the sound from Sudoku, for example. The great thing about this album though is that most of the time all of those cheap sounding synths work really well with the rest of the sounds and the rest of the performances and the instrumentation towards this thing, which makes for a very sort of bizarre feel. I really don't know how to describe it because I don't think I've experienced albums that would sound like this, or that they would just combine sounds in this way like with this album, and it makes for a result where I don't really know how to feel, whether I love it or I just indifferent towards this. The result though still gives a good feel. It's not like the pretentious way where you see the keyboards and all of the instrumentation being handled like with a liturgy project. So getting towards the rest of the album, I think we get some quite solid moments, but definitely there are some moments towards the structures or some parts in some of the songs where I wasn't really that much of a fan. I think that the third track is a bit longer than what I wanted to. There are some very nice portions towards the beginning and towards halfway through the song. However, the sort of 3-minute dark ambient portion at the end of the song felt slightly unnecessary and wasn't that well made in my opinion. The fourth and the fifth track were just kind of okay. I don't really have that many things to add about those tracks other than they just have some moments that I feel they work fascinatingly well and some others that I was just scratching my head. But definitely the biggest head scratcher out of this album was the sixth track, Taiwan Party, which is a track that goes the closest to the sound of like black metal with its instrumentation, but the thing is that this track ends up being extremely chaotic. The drumming and the riffs to this thing kind of sound sloppy at some occasions, and in general it goes to this very repetitive and monotone direction with the riffs and the whole melody to it, and it just adds up constantly over and over, and it just makes for a big mess of a track that I didn't really enjoy that much. I think the album though is quite decent. I quite enjoyed it. There were definitely some moments that were really good. And it's definitely one of the more unique albums I've heard in like black metal. And trust me, I've heard lots of different like very weird and absurd black metal albums, but really with some of the occasions of these tracks they get kind of ridiculous. Not an amazing project, there were definitely tracks like the last one especially which was kind of weak, but other than that I recommend this album. I'm pretty sure fans of Oranssi Pazuzu are going to enjoy this album, and I'm definitely also going to listen to some of the previous works of Oranssi Pazuzu, since this album was definitely quite interesting to say the least. I'm going to give this album a 7 out of 10. What's your opinion on this album? Like it, dislike it, why, and what do you want me to review next time? Let me know down in the comments. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video, subscribe for more content like this. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video. Goodbye.